Well, good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, depending where you're joining us from. Welcome here to the launch pad and our live launch coverage of the first SpaceX launch of 2024. SpaceX is preparing to launch a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket from Vandenberg Space Force Base in California, carrying 21 more Starlink satellites to orbit. But more exciting is that 6 of those satellites on board today's mission are Starlink's new direct-to-cell satellites. These are the first satellites to help SpaceX and Starlink test the capabilities that will enable mobile network operators around the world to provide seamless global access to texting, calling, and browsing wherever you're on land, lakes, coastal waters, and maybe even at sea or in the sky. So it's exciting to see another stage of Starlink being deployed. We had a little bit of a surprise here because normally we're used to seeing Starlink missions begin coverage 5 minutes before launch, but because the Starlink direct to cell's on board, I guess they're starting a little bit early. So as we get started listening to SpaceX Mission Control, let's see in the chat where you're watching from. Don't forget to engage the like button. Let's listen in to SpaceX Mission Control.
You're looking at a live view of the Falcon 9 rocket awaiting liftoff from Vandenberg Space Force Base, California, in just 14 minutes from now. Tonight's mission marks SpaceX's 296th overall launch, but our first of 2024, and we're excited to kick off an even more exciting year. Hi, everyone. My name is Kate Tice, Senior Quality Systems Engineering Manager here at SpaceX.
And I'm Jessie Anderson, a Manufacturing Engineering Manager, and we will be your host for today's launch of 15 Starlink V2 Minis that will add to our growing constellation, providing reliable, high-speed internet around the world.
To date, Starlink has completed more than 100 launches, putting more than 5,000 satellites in orbit. But today's Starlink launch is a little bit different. In addition to our standard broadband satellites, we're also launching 6 of our first ever direct-to-cell satellites capable of connecting directly to your cell phone. This is really cool, and we'll be talking about it more later in the show.
It's hard to believe that it was just 3 years ago when Starlink launched the Better Than Nothing beta service for our first paying customers in the United States. And today, Starlink is providing high-speed, low-latency internet to more than 2.3 million households and organizations in over 70 countries and many markets around the world, spanning all 7 continents and oceans.
And what's really cool is Starlink now delivers service to more customers than any other satellite internet service provider in the world. As you can see from these photos featured on stories.starlink.com, Starlink is able to quickly deploy to locations where quality internet access has been unreliable or completely unavailable.
And so many people in the hardest to reach areas of the world are now getting online, some for the first time ever. This means critical access to resources we often take for granted, like virtual healthcare and education. If you're using Starlink in a unique or interesting way, be sure to share your story with us at stories.starlink.com.
As I mentioned earlier, today we're taking Starlink a step further with the launch of our first ever satellites capable of enabling cell phone service. It's called Direct-to-Cell, and through partnerships with wireless providers like T-Mobile here in the US, you'll be able to connect using your existing cell phone, even in places that are typically out of range. Connectivity nearly everywhere.
Cellular providers using direct-to-cell will have reciprocal global access in all partner nations. In other words, for carriers who partner in direct-to-cell, their customers would stay seamlessly connected. In addition to T-Mobile in the US, these carriers include Optus in Australia, Salt in Switzerland, Rogers in Canada, One New Zealand, Entel in Chile and Peru, and KDDI in Japan.
As you can tell, this is huge. For those of us who have ever been in a place where you can't get signal, no, it can be super frustrating. Worst case, it can even mean the difference between life or death. In fact, about 90% of the Earth remains unreachable by traditional cell signals from any wireless company.
These dead zones have serious consequences for remote communities and those who travel and work off the grid. People in those areas are either left disconnected or resort to lugging around a satellite phone, which is incredibly expensive.
And pretty heavy. Starlink's direct-to-cell service will provide coverage nearly everywhere a customer can see the sky, bringing cell phone connectivity almost anywhere. And with partners like T-Mobile, we have a real chance to bring meaningful connectivity to people who need it most.
And if you're just joining us, welcome here to the launch pad. T-minus 10 minutes, 32 seconds, and counting till launch of another batch of Starlink satellites. But as you've been hearing there, more importantly, the first ever Starlink direct-to-cell satellites are on board. SpaceX in December applied to the FAA and FCC for authorization to launch these new satellites to begin testing this new direct-to-cell service, and they have authorization and are ready to begin testing that and rolling out global direct-to-cell coverage, a major game changer in the cell phone mobility industry, no longer using satellites only for emergency communications or via sat phones, but also for the day-to-day. If you're just joining us, though, welcome here to the Launchpad and our live launch coverage of SpaceX Starlink 7-9 launching from Vandenberg Space Force Base in California. We got lots of people tuning in. Let us know in the chat where you're watching from. We got Mike B in Columbus. We've got Matthew in Rosemount. We got Erwin in New York. We got Dr. Scott in Virginia. Trixie's in Arkansas. Noah's in Eden Prairie. Great to have you all joining us here. We got Fun Awesome in Houston, Texas. And we have Sammy in Washington State and Ben in Atlanta. We have a poll running in the chat. We want to hear, do you use Starlink service? We got a few options for you. Yes, soon you're waiting for your dish. No, it's not in your region yet. Or just no, you don't use it. And it's really awesome. 17% of you are using service. Let's listen back into SpaceX Mission Control.
Starlink's direct-to-cell capability will first enable text messaging, and then after more satellites are placed in orbit, voice and data coverage will be enabled.
Direct-to-cell will also connect to Internet of Things devices, like those used in remote areas for agriculture, environmental monitoring, and fire detection. Think about the impact on the safety around the globe, like people assisting in emergency situations, like firefighters and rescues along coastal waters. It can also help people like me, who love hiking in national parks and other places where cell phones get no reception. I go there to relax and enjoy nature, so I want to stay offline. But knowing that I can connect in an emergency would provide a peace of mind for both me and my loved ones.
So let's talk about how this all works. First, we get those satellites to orbit, and that's what we're doing today. Once on orbit, the satellites will immediately connect to the Starlink constellation to provide global connectivity.
Direct-to-cell allows users to seamlessly connect to SpaceX satellites when they enter a remote area that currently has no cell service. It operates just like a mobile phone tower does on the ground, but from space. The service will work with any 4G LTE device, and most current smartphones are already compatible. So that's the latest news on Starlink's newest capability. If you want to stay up to date on direct-to-cell, go to direct.starlink.com.
And as we mentioned earlier, to enable direct-to-cell capability, we're adding new hardware to our Starlink satellites. With any changes to our satellites in orbit, SpaceX works closely with leading astronomers from around the world to better understand if there are any impacts to their observations, because we firmly believe in the importance of a natural night sky for all of us to enjoy.
While we do expect these first 6 Starlink direct-to-cell satellites to be a bit brighter than previous Starlink V2 minis, we plan to measure the brightness of the 6 and compare those measurements to our models. We'll then make adjustments to hardware and operations to honor our commitment to making our satellites as dim as possible.
Now back to today's launch. We are just about 7 minutes from liftoff. So far, everything is proceeding smoothly. We are watching the cumulus clouds overhead, and currently
Engine chill has started.
70% go for launch. And while we wait, let's take a closer look at the vehicle on your screen. Falcon 9 is a 2-stage rocket, and it also happens to be the first orbital class rocket capable of reflight. Falcon 9 stands about 230 feet tall, which is almost as tall as the Taj Mahal in India, and it's named after the Millennium Falcon from Star Wars. The first stage, which is the tallest portion of the vehicle, provides 1.7 million pounds of thrust thanks to its 9 Merlin M1D engines. And actually, the number 9 in Falcon 9 refers to those 9 M1D engines on the first stage, but there are actually 10 engines on the rocket.
That's right. The second stage has that
Stage
10th
1,
engine.
RP1 load is complete.
That 10th engine, which is the Merlin vacuum or MVAC engine. This engine is similar to a first stage M1D engine, but has more redundancies as well as a larger nozzle that allows the second stage to perform in the vacuum of space. The first stage is what gets us out of the Earth's atmosphere and into space, and the second stage takes all the satellites to their targeted drop-off orbit. Now, on top of the second stage, you'll see that large barrel structure with a pointed nose. That is our payload fairing. It's composed of 2 halves, each made up of carbon fiber composite material. As a whole, the fairing protects our satellites until we're in the vacuum of space. Around 3 minutes into flight, once we've exited the atmosphere, we will jettison the fairing halves and attempt to retrieve them once they return to Earth. We want to jettison those fairings as soon as we can because the weight of the fairings actually decrease second stage performance.
And for reference, the payload fairing is about 40 feet tall with a 17-foot diameter. So to put that size into perspective, an average fire truck is about 40 feet long and 12 feet wide. So a fire truck would just fill up our payload fairing. As the fairing halves return to Earth, so will our first stage, which is set to land on our drone ship, Of Course I Still Love You, and you can see it there on your screen, stationed out in the Pacific Ocean. Overall, SpaceX has reflown 231 boosters, but tonight
Falcon 9 tanks are pressurizing for strong back retract.
Tonight, our rocket will be making its first flight to space.
Now, for those of you who follow along, you'll already know that we typically end our Starlink webcasts following first stage landing and confirmation of a successful MVAC shutdown. Now, for updates on deployment, be sure to check out @SpaceX on X. Now, at this time, as we mentioned before, weather is about 70% chance of go. We have been watching the weather with some wind speeds and cumulus cloud rules. However, we are go for launch at this point in time. And as for the range is green, and they are ready to support liftoff just 4 minutes and 10 seconds, almost 10 seconds from now. We can actually see those clamp arms under the fairing have just opened. That's in preparation for strong back retraction. The strong back is also referred to as the TE, or transporter erector. That's the large structure that you see there next to Falcon 9. It's now moving away by a couple degrees from the vehicle.
Yeah, and this TE does move away from the vehicle. This is in preparation to clear the pad for liftoff. It's moving a little bit away right now, but at T0 it'll also move a significant amount more away from the vehicle as the vehicle lifts off. And the next milestone coming up once the TE is completely reclined for this phase will be at T-minus 3 minutes. That will be liquid oxygen loading complete on the first stage. We are continuing to load LOX on the second stage as well, and that will wrap up at the T-minus 2 minute mark. And once we hit that mark, that will complete propellant loading on Falcon 9 altogether. So just a few seconds away from LOX loading complete on stage 1.
Stage 1 LOX load is complete.
And there's that call
And
out.
stage 1 POGO.
LOX loading is complete on the first stage vehicle. That means that the first stage is fully loaded with RP1 and liquid oxygen. And again, we are awaiting liquid oxygen loading completion on the second stage, again, which will wrap up at the T-minus 2 minute mark.
Now that LOX load is complete on the first stage, we will start to see some of those white clouds form around the vehicle. We'll see more of that occur after LOX load completes in about 20 seconds on the second stage. Totally normal. That's just liquid oxygen venting from the lines in the TE. Looking like that second stage LOX load should be wrapping up in just a couple of seconds here. As we said before, weather has been a watch item leading up to tonight's launch, but as of right now, we are still go for launch on the weather front. Everything continues nominally with our countdown so far for an on-time launch.
Stage 2 LOX load is complete.
There we heard that call out, letting us know that Falcon Stage 2 LOX load is complete. So at this point in time, Falcon 9 is now fully loaded with all of its propellants, equaling 1 million pounds of liquid fuel and oxygen. Now in about a few seconds, we'll hear a call out that Falcon 9 is in startup. That means that the onboard flight computers have taken over the launch countdown.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
All right. Right now, Stage 1 and Stage 2 are beginning to pressurize to their final pressure prior to launch.
LD is go for launch.
All right, that's the final go needed for tonight's launch, coming to us from our launch director. So at this point in time, at T-minus 35 seconds, all systems are go for liftoff of Falcon 9 with our Starlink
T-minus 30
satellites
seconds.
including our first 6 direct-to-cell satellites. Let's listen in on the final count.
T-minus 15 seconds. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition and liftoff of Falcon 9.
Vehicle is pitching downrange. Stage 1 propulsion is nominal.
At T plus 33 seconds, you are watching Falcon 9 accelerate our Starlink satellites out into space. We are throttling down our engines on the first stage vehicle, and that is in preparation for Max Q.
Power and telemetry nominal.
Good call-outs there. Max Q is the largest amount of stresses that the vehicle sees on ascent, so we do slow the vehicle down just a little bit in preparation for passing through Max Q. And that should be coming up.
Falcon 9 is supersonic.
That should be coming up here in just under 10 seconds.
Max Q.
Great news, we have passed through Max Q.
All right, we're a minute and a half into...
MVAC engine chill has started.
That call there tells us that the engine on the second stage, that MVAC, has begun to flow some super chilled liquid oxygen through the engine to begin to bring that hardware down in temperature. We're less than a minute away from main engine cutoff, stage separation, second engine start. Those all happen really quickly, so don't blink. After that, we will jettison the fairings. At this point in time, the first stage is experiencing about 3.3 Gs. Beautiful view there on your screen of the vehicle as it's just lifted off from Vandenberg Space Force Base. It's now able to see that plume beginning to deplete as we are preparing for main engine cutoff.
Main engine cutoff. Stage separation confirmed.
All right, as you can see there on your screen, successful MVAC ignition there on your right-hand side. And before that, we had first stage engine shutdown and stage separation. We can see here on the left-hand side of the screen, the first stage grid fins starting to deploy. Those help steer the booster back to its precise landing.
Fairing separation confirmed.
All right, as you heard and just saw, successful fairing separation. That marks the 9th flight for one of those fairing halves and the 11th flight for the other. We, of course, will attempt to recover those fairing halves again to use on a future flight.
And if you're just joining us, welcome here to the launch pad. You're looking at a live view of the second stage of Falcon 9 as it carries 21 Starlink satellites, including 6 of the first ever Starlink direct-to-cell satellites to orbit. Keeping a close eye on the telemetry of the first stage as it approaches its apogee, the second stage continuing to burn nominally. If it's your first time here, though, welcome. Make sure you engage that like button and subscribe so you never miss another live launch coverage, docking, undocking, or return to Earth, because here at the Launchpad, it's our mission to inform and inspire the explorers of tomorrow, because we believe that space is better together, and we bring you full live launch coverage of not only SpaceX, but everyone around the world. We also invite you to join us over on our Discord. That's where our community hangs out in between launches, and it's free to join. And if you like what we do, consider hitting that join button to help us expand our coverage and bring you better coverage of everything from around the world. There's a lot happening in 2024, and SpaceX is kicking it off with the second official launch of the 2024 calendar year. Let's listen back into SpaceX Mission Control as we approach the entry burn of the first stage. The first stage has hit its apogee and is now beginning its descent back down to the drone ship out in the Pacific Ocean.
It's coming up in a little over a minute from now. And though you can't see it on your screen, on the bottom left-hand corner, you could see the telemetry of the Stage 1 vehicle, so you could see its speed and altitude. And for the second stage vehicle, on your right hand, the right bottom corner of your screen is where you can see the telemetry for Stage 2. We're about 1 minute away from the entry burn on the first stage vehicle.
Both vehicles are following a nominal trajectory.
And good callouts there. Both first stage and second stage are following nominal trajectories. Today's mission marks SpaceX's 296th overall launch, and it is the first of 2024. Again, it is carrying our Starlink satellites for this mission, including our first 6 direct-to-cell satellites. Now that entry burn on the first stage is coming up in just under 20 seconds. There you can see on your left-hand screen is a view from the first stage.
Stage 1 entry burn startup.
Good timing. We heard that call out, and now you can see on your screen those engines have relit on the first stage vehicle. This is just about a 20-second burn.
Stage 1 entry burn shutdown.
There we heard that call out, as well as you could see that the engines have shut down on the first stage vehicle. That concludes the entry burn, the first of 2 burns that the first stage requires to make its way back to landing. The next burn is the landing burn, coming up in just about a minute and a half.
Stage 1 FTS has safed.
Everything continues to look good for both the first and second stage. If you've been following along with that altitude there on the left-hand side of your screen for stage 1, it actually kept increasing in altitude until about 4.5 minutes, T plus 4.5 minutes. As we can see, it's getting closer and closer. We are targeting a landing on our drone ship. Just read the instructions. Excuse me, of course,
Stage
I still
1
love you.
transonic.
And there we just heard the call out that the first stage is transonic, telling us that it is traveling near the speed of sound. Now only 6 kilometers above the ocean. So in about 12 seconds, we should see that landing burn ignite. That's a 1-engine burn designed to bring
Stage
the
1
booster.
landing burn.
There we heard the call out, so we should see it here. There we go. So the first stage has lit 1 engine to prepare for landing.
Stage 2 FTS has safed.
We're targeting a landing on our drone ship, which you there
Landing leg deploy.
see there now. Of course, I still love you.
Stage 1 landing confirmed.
A beautiful nighttime shot there of a successful landing. That is Falcon 9 touching down for the 260th overall successful recovery of an orbital class rocket. And with that successful booster landing, we will wrap up today's launch coverage. Thank you so much for tuning in. We are thrilled to see our first direct-to-cell satellites launch to orbit today.
And if you're just joining us, there's a live view from the second stage of those 21 Starlink V2 minis on board, including 6 of the first ever Starlink direct-to-cell satellites. They're wrapping up their coverage as SpaceX no longer provides coverage through deployment. Unfortunately, deployment set to occur 1 hour, 2 minutes, 30 seconds into today's flight, following a final burn 53 minutes into flight by the second stage, just to finalize its orbit. If you haven't yet, join us over on the TLP Discord. That's where our community hangs out in between streams, and engage that subscribe button so you never miss another live launch coverage, because here at the Launchpad, it's our mission to inform and inspire the explorers of tomorrow. We hope you'll join us back here for another live launch coverage, but for now, from our TLP Canada studio, I'll see you in Discord or next time, because space is better together. Happy New Year.